Good afternoon and good evening, depending on what time of the day it is for you, as you tune into our 39th episode of, formerly titled Two Irish Guys Discussing Software, and normally hosted by our eminent Origina CEO and co-founder, Tomás O'Leary. But unfortunately, Tomás, or some of you might say, fortunately, Tomás is not with us today. He's gallivanting somewhere, I think, changing the software world somewhere in the South Pacific. But that's okay, because his co-host, which is myself, Brendan Walsh, is here with you today. And with our more recent non-Irish, but I think it was called last week, was called Normal Person, or Persons of, or something like that. Tomás referred to as Harry Candadai, Origina's
regular guy.
Regular guy. That's it. Yeah.
That's it. I am a regular guy. Yeah.
Yeah, and you are also our regular SVP of Global Marketing and Thought Leadership here at Origina. And I think, Harry, you're in the West Coast of the US right now.
I am in the San Francisco Bay Area. That's right. A pleasure to be here, Brendan. Yeah, great to do this for a change with you. Been doing this a few times with Tomás, so this is good.
I've missed a couple, but I'm back, baby.
I know.
And we're also joined by a very good friend of Origina's and also a member of our advisory board, and we'll do a kind of a lengthier introduction later. But Stephen O'Donnell, I think we call you Stephen, don't we?
Absolutely.
And Stephen's here to help us discuss the topic at hand for the episode, which is how to keep your IT roadmap free of vendor and budget roadblocks. So a very topical discussion. And we've been kind of doing tours of Gartner conferences and various other gigs around the place, Harry, and this is very topical. It's kind of been prime time in some of our presentations. So we're going to get into the meat of that later and discuss how do you actually do that? How do you free up those roadblocks, be it vendor obstacles or budget issues, so that you can crack on with your digital transformation programs. But as ever, we have lots of things to discuss. This is a podcast to talk about software, and it's, as ever, full of news and views and sometimes salacious rumors. And normally we use the word allegedly in front of those so we don't get into any trouble. But we try to keep our listeners up to date on what's been going on in the world. You know, a roundup of various news articles that are newsworthy and thematical. And there have been lots of things happening in the news. I mean, I missed the last podcast myself. I did listen to it, but some of that is worth, rehashing, because, for some of the visitors today that may have missed it.
Yeah. Now, a lot of juicy gossip for sure, Brendan. We should cover some good ground, but yeah, I think it's worth the recap. Let's talk about the first one that Tomás and I did back in. We touched upon it in the November and December podcasts, and in case anyone missed it, this is about the IBM price increases that they announced through Q4 of last year, right? You recall back in September, love the term, general price harmonization. That's what they call that. And that's for the IBM Passport Advantage Express. And it's about the 8% increase for most of the world. But come into November, there's another announcement, right? Distributed software price changes, depending on where you are in the currency. It could be anywhere from 19 to 24%. And that, because of the timing, just, customers were blindsided by that, right? Everyone's going to think about this. All the software asset managers, everybody's heading into this 2023. They got their budgets planned, and suddenly this whole thing comes out of nowhere, and that threw them in a loop. I recall one article, just very quickly on this one. Rich Gibbons from ITAM Review. I remember his article where he talked about how this thing could potentially, if not already, backfire. And he did make a point that has become one of the reasons that an option like third-party support or alternative customers are going to look for alternative products, just because of these kind of high-handed or blanket changes, which is just not acceptable.
But it just seems like outrageous, right? I mean, IBM, I was reading some articles recently, which is probably why I brought it up, because it seems to be still topical. They didn't just call it harmonization. They actually called it modest I mean, I do, in no sense of the word is 24%, modest. And then I was talking to one of our license experts here today, and I said, how many products does that impact? Because is it like a few? 15,000 part numbers or products are impacted. So you can't really get away with it. I mean, you can't escape, right?
Here's the problem, right? I mean, it's going to this is a credibility issue. I remember a quote, I can't remember who, but can't remember a credible vendor pushing an uncamouflaged. This is how this goes back to the outrage part, right? This is, I mean, they just seems like they just don't care. Pushing these kind of big blanket increases, probably, maybe even sometimes once in a lifetime type act that's going to destroy a lot of credibility. But anyway, so that was one news we covered. Go ahead.
Well, like Steve has bought $30 billion worth of software, believe it or not, in his lifetime. So Steve, have you ever seen anything like this?
Rarely. I mean, my take on this is that IBM used to be one of my favorite vendors because they were always into looking after the customer. If you had trouble, if you had something, big outage, lots of issues, IBM would always step up and help out, and you paid a premium price for it. But this is kind of like it feels just like a shakedown. You're running a little corner shop, and some guys come in and shake you down for a bag full of cash. That's exactly what it feels like. They've got the power. The customer finds it really difficult to get rid of the software that the price has gone up with, and it's just a shakedown. But the other thing that absolutely incensed me, I just couldn't believe this, was when they said that they were going to not tell customers about changes to licensing rules. They were going to publish them on the internet. So you said 17,000 products. So if you've got one of those 17,000 products, you're going to have to be spending half your life checking the internet to see if you're legal or not. And if you're not legal, you're going to get audited, and you're going to get done over again.
Yeah, well, we're going to come to the IPA changes in a minute, because there's a few other galling changes in that document. But yeah, I think the price changes is one, and then capped off by changes to IPAA. But any other news there on?
No, it's along the lines of another topic we talked about, Tomas and I, last time, and just continuing Steve's thought on auditing, right? I mean, take the other big mega vendor here, Oracle, and what they've been doing. This is almost, it's so funny, it's almost like mirror on the wall, who's the nastiest of them all, right? It's like one of those things with, like, they're trying to outdo each other. We call it, or not we, but experts call it this unprecedented auditing behavior. And if you've been following the Java licensing model change that they've been doing, huge issues for companies, right? Another Originus friends, Pam Fulmer, if you recall, Brandon, talked about the Java audit bomb a couple of years ago in one of these podcasts. So bottom line is, in one fell swoop, Oracle completely changed the rules and pricing around licensing Java. And they've ramped up audits as a result. And we predict that Java will be a huge part of this Oracle audit activity in 2023 and beyond. Now, talk about a growing revenue stream when you can't sell software the good old-fashioned way. What happened to those days when you competed on quality and features and capabilities and increase your revenues? This is another way. This is a big revenue stream. So, I'm just picking on Oracle, but all the mega vendors are in this category, trying to, okay, so whose pockets can we put more, our hands in, and as Steve says, shake down.
Well, Harry, the thing is that, if the software is live and there's a big team developing it, there's new features, those features are valuable to customers, you almost don't mind paying for that because you get value.
For sure.
But the product's dead. There's no more development going into it. All the people who used to support that product or write the code for the product are actually probably working for Origina rather than working for IBM. That's not a joke. I've come across so many of them, and you're just not getting value. The risk-averse customer says, well, we got to keep doing what we've always done.
Yeah. And we're going to talk a lot more about this specific, main topic, which is, the vendor tactics and the vendor roadblocks and the budget roadblocks in a few minutes. But we did touch upon the recent IPAA changes. So the IBM Passport Advantage program changes, not to be confused with the IBM Passport License Agreement, which is an underlying agreement for your perpetual license entitlements. This agreement hasn't been updated in about, I think it's 6 years, 2017, if my research serves me well. And it applies to everybody. Oh, well, all new customers immediately and current customers from the 1st of May. And I picked out 3 things, and you kind of touched upon one of them already, Steve, and there may be others that you've picked upon. But while there's, not a huge amount of change, there are some significant ones. And the significant one is just how challenging it's going to be for companies to keep their house in order. I mean, they already have a challenge, right? We know it's difficult. Compliance is not easy. You have to have a SAM team. You have to have SAM expertise. You got to buy tooling to do it. You got to buy tooling from some of IBM's partner companies, or you can buy tooling from them. But there's already a cost to be robust in your processes. But so on top of all of that, now IBM is saying that the clients will have to, for all programs, all sites, which are Passport Advantage sites, and for all environments, provide IBM, upon request with 30 days notice, a report, which isn't defined, of deployed programs in a format not defined, requested by IBM with 30 days notice, using records, system tools, outputs, and other system information not defined. I mean, so they're asking for something to be provided, which is, extremely difficult to do within 30 days notice, and they haven't even defined how you're supposed to do that. I mean, this is like, what's going on?
It's the shakedown.
It's the shakedown.
It is. They won't. I mean, I've been through so many software audits as a CIO. They start off, they come in. It doesn't matter who it is, whether it's Oracle, Microsoft, CA, Computer Associates, BMC, SAP, IBM. They come in, and the first thing is they want to terrify you. They want to terrify you to get you to be really concerned. And the point is that when they get to the end of the exercise, they want to get you in a position where you're very weak. You don't really know what you've got. They think that they know what you've got. And then they want to negotiate with you some big price increase, a whole bunch of new licenses that you didn't think you needed. I remember once with Oracle being told I owed them $2 billion. This is when I was at Cable and Wireless. That's not a joke. It's a fact.
Yeah.
Because we had one of our systems pointing at the internet, and we had it licensed on per user rather than per core. Really simple thing, but there you go. It's that kind of, terrorism. That's the word I would use. It's terrorism tactics to frighten the customers and get them to soften up to pay more money.
Yeah. And
love it. Technology terrorism. Well,
I like it.
That should get everybody's blood boiling, right? So this is exactly what Steve said. This is changing the rules, but the game is still on. I mean, you just keep moving the goalpost, and you're trying to maximize or get as much revenue you can in any and every way possible.
Yeah. And we previously had a chap on here, and we talked about hostage negotiation tactics. But now we have a new one. It's technology terrorism, where it's getting worse.
Oh yes, it goes back to the point, right? I mean, all that you mentioned that you need to do in 30 days. It's just unbelievable that you've been asked to do that. But I go back to Steve, that $2 billion example, and I'm sure so many CIOs, but would love to get your take. With these kind of trends from all these big mega vendors, it's not a question of if, right? It's a question of when they'll come knocking on your door. You got to be in an offense position regardless, meaning now's a great time. If you haven't received that call or a knock on your door, make sure you have the right team, make sure you have the right tools to manage, to monitor your IBM software deployments across the enterprise, right? Because who knows where they look for? They might look for it in disaster recovery. They might look for it in dev environments or test environments. You never know because the game keeps.
Well, it's all environments. It's like it is all environments.
It does say all
sites,
environments,
all programs, and it's not just for programs that are eligible for subcapacity. It's extending it to every program. I mean, the only option really is this is too hard now. It's too hard to manage this. The threat is too big. They're coming after you. So the only thing to do is get rid of this software, get it out of your data center, and expedite that transition.
Or get rid of the vendor. I mean,
the vendor, yeah.
I find this objectionable. We in enterprises spend an absolute fortune in buying this enterprise software, hundreds of thousands of pounds, millions of pounds on some occasions, and then the vendor, which I think it's against common law practices, changing the law after the event. It's about, you're not allowed to walk down that street yesterday. Now I'm going to arrest you. Making that law up tomorrow. I mean, it does not make sense. So the thing to do is to get rid of the vendor. You don't necessarily to get rid of the software, because if you've got perpetual licenses, you don't need the vendor anymore. But you might have to do away with vendor.
With the vendor. Well, I mean, but what they're doing in the agreements, to that point, how do I get rid of the vendor? So the lawyers must have thought this one through, because what they're saying now in some of their language relating to subscription and support renewals is that if you want to reduce the number of licenses, so I want to get rid of the vendor, so I'm going to say, well, I don't need your support, Mr. Vendor. I do want to keep my perpetual licenses. So I want to reduce the number of licenses under support, or I want to reduce all of them. You now need to prove that you've reduced your software usage 30 days prior to renewal. And if you can't prove that, or if you can't reduce it, you're going to have to pay full dollar, even if you're using less software, and you're going to have to pay the 24% increase. So while it's absolutely right to get away from the vendor, they're making it harder.
I don't even understand that. You got a perpetual license. And
you own the license, right? I mean, that's what the perpetual license is. You've paid it.
Perpetual license for 1,000 users. What are they talking about? That does not make common sense to me.
Yeah, well, it's not supposed to make sense, and this is why they write it this way, because it's supposed to be very hard to interpret so that they can come back at you and tell you later, this is what we meant. And you've said it already. Now they can change these terms that we're just talking about without notification. So you've got to keep your eye on the ball. You got to keep your eye on the websites. You got to look out for those 404, page missing, and make sure you're up to speed. But look, let's shift gear.
I was just going to say, Brendan, your last point, if you can't convince them, confuse them. So they get scared. They don't know what you're missing, and they're going to, play by your book, which is exactly what we'll talk about. These are classic examples of a vendor-dictated roadmap, right?
Yeah, well, when you can't software innovate, you got to contractually innovate. So that's what's going on. But there's been a few other things. I mean, IBM seems to be a big theme this week, because there's been some other kind of interesting things going on with IBM. Harry, tell us about that?
Oh my gosh, more juicy stuff. They just IBM keeps on giving more and more news, and this one is a new securities fraud lawsuit brought upon them. The lawsuit goes on to say that the IBM allegedly deceived the market about its progress in developing Watson, cloud technologies, and other new sources of revenue by deliberately misclassifying the money it was making from mainframe deals and assigning that money to these products. So think about it, right? The IBM top brass accused again, and mainframe, as you know, for IBM, it's a near monopoly business. So they have a lot of that. But what about all these less popular technologies? They got to keep Wall Street happy. You got to move and show the movement to the cloud and be creative. So what I understand is they start bundling these the technologies, newer, less popular technologies, in these 3 to 5 year mainframe ELAs, and they've been going after these healthcare insurance companies, the big ones. And finally, somebody, I can't remember who the lawsuit was from, but they say, okay, these are false, misleading statements about your financial results, your cloud computing business, and this is artificially inflating stock prices. So love to see how this pans out, but it's clear. It's like, all this, as you say, being creative with contract and be creative with your revenue assignments, because at some point that's what the market's still looking for, and that's what Wall Street wants. So they're being very creative.
But Harry, there's a difference between being creative and misstating. So being creative, all accountants, all CFOs are creative. They stretch the envelope in order to position the company. But if you're saying that mainframe support revenues are cloud revenues, I'm not a lawyer here, I don't want to be locked up for saying something out of line here. But to me, as a layman, that sounds like it's misstatements.
Yeah.
It might be illegal.
Oh, the claim that it is illegal, and the Securities and Exchange Commission will be brought in to adjudicate. But if I'm a pension fund and I'm plowing my money into a vendor where I think the sexy AI cloud technology revenues are increasing, and I see a trend, and I say, well, I'm going to go after that vendor. But really, it's just some other old legacy technology being dressed up as cloud. Well, that's just pure fraud. Now, as to whether they're doing it or not, we don't know, but we'll see as the lawsuit. It'll definitely be one to follow when we get down the road in podcast number 45 or something to see what comes out of that.
The bottom line there is it's all these bundling tactics, right? It makes it so hard, and when you bundle it in this big mainframe thing and parsing out, and then you assign it. So anyway, that's one
rule for the customer and another rule for us. But
of course,
but IBM is already in court this time by its own doing. It's suing Micro Focus, right?
It is suing Micro Focus. Let's see where this one goes. And if you've missed that news, then this is about IBM saying that Micro Focus has infringed on its IBM patents by it sounds sneaky, by entering into business agreement to gain access to their systems and then reverse engineer their KICS or CICS mainframe services to allow use of generic hardware instead of the IBM mainframes. Now that they won't let happen. I mean, gosh, this is it's like 90% support margin business, right? Nobody's going to let go of that. IBM mainframe business, that's their monopoly almost. They're not going to let go of that. So they are going hard after Micro Focus. It reminds me of a past lawsuit, Brendan and Steve, if you recall. I think it was called LZ Labs or something. The company accused, that's when IBM accused them of opening a shell company to gain access to IBM software systems. And they claimed that the LZ Labs team, they reverse engineered all of this into other mainframe alternatives. So the net of this is anything to do with mainframe. So they are very much in court. And
that'll be a big one, because Micro Focus have just been bought by OpenText. I think it was a $6 billion transaction. So twice Micro Focus revenues, which were about $3 billion. Micro Focus have been struggling as a company, but Micro Focus say, which is fair. They've been doing this for 20 years. They've been helping companies get off mainframe and lifting and shifting with no code change these application processing systems to non-mainframe. So I don't know. Have you had any experience with this, Steve, using these tools? Or
it's really commonplace, because when you've shrunk your mainframe or mid-range platforms down to bare minimum, the cost of running that small estate becomes completely off the charts. You need to do something. You need to move it onto another platform. Micro Focus was a reasonable way of doing it.
Yeah.
But to be frank, Micro Focus's licensing regulations are very similar to IBM's. You're jumping out of the frying pan and falling in the fire.
Yeah. They're both tarred with the same brush, but they will be tarring each other in court because IBM is causing it brazen theft, and Micro Focus is saying it's this is what we've been doing. It's our core business. So that'll be a big one when they get into battle. But let's leave IBM alone. I think we've picked on IBM enough for today. There must be some. I think we mentioned AI there as being one of the new sexy software. Like what's going on in the AI world? I hear a lot of chat about AI. So what's happening?
No. Oh no tech conversation is complete without AI or Chat GPT today, right? Gosh, it's taken the world by storm. But here's the reality: that the more I learn about it, I'm still learning like everybody else. But let's talk about a couple of news items here on AI, right? So Microsoft, if you know, made a big investment in OpenAI. the GPT technology, not to be confused with ChatGPT, which is the product, but they're using the GPT technology into their Bing search engine and the Edge browser. And from what I'm reading, sounds pretty cool. I mean, you can tell it, create a vacation package in Mexico for 5 days and tell me how much it's going to cost. That kind of stuff. Very advanced and cool advancements.
That could be handy because my wife is asking me to organize our summer holiday right now. So
see, there you go. So this was so there you go. That's what. So they do. So they previewed that, and I think I can't recall the time frame, but they say they're going to make it available to many users soon. So that's good that they're using the OpenAI technology, and like any new trend or new technology advancement, so they're ahead. So not to be left behind in this conversation, Google, of course, they had their version of this in what's called their Bard, right? In the recent Bard launch, I think it was about the same time, a couple of weeks ago, when the Alphabet chairman, John Hennessy, I think they may have gone at this a little too soon, but I can sense the urgency that they probably had to put something out there to counter the OpenAI advancement by Microsoft. But I think it was less than impressive was the consensus of many articles.
Did I hear like an 8-year-old child asked a basic question about astrology and it got it wrong or something like that?
It got it wrong. And I think they had to backpedal this one. And they said, it's still about 1 to 2 years before it becomes truly useful. And we're now concerned that it's giving inaccurate answers and inappropriate responses for the society and all of that stuff. So they probably jumped the gun on this one, but that's okay. Everyone's trying their best, right? So they're pushing forward, but not an impressive launch. So they probably have to go back and revisit the strategy. So that chatter is happening. But the net of this is, which I'm very interested is, how is this going to be truly functional for businesses? What are the real use cases and how reliable can these be? So the good news is the games have begun. We'll have to see how they evolve and who the main players are. So very interesting. We should, we'll keep an eye on this one in our podcast as we go along. The other one transitioning. So let's give IBM a break. Let's talk about Oracle again. Payment. So Oracle is launching into retail payments with its Oracle Retail Payment Cloud service. And this is an expansion of they have a retail cloud platform. So now they're making all these contactless payments possible in store and all of that stuff. So it's all in the cloud. Here's my question. All innovation from all of these big vendors is going onto the cloud. What about the on-premise applications that I have spent millions of dollars, maybe even perfecting? Go down the list, like Oracle systems, SAP systems, IBM systems. I've spent all that money. Now, why am I not getting value or innovation in that product versus everything going to the cloud? Is this, Steve, is this one way for me to be pushed to the cloud? I just don't get it. I mean, all the money is going to the cloud.
Yeah, well, the benefit that we were sold about going to the cloud was that you could always switch it off. You try it for a while. If you don't like it, you can switch it off. You don't have to pay any more money. Well, that's all changing, isn't it? In fact, the cloud is a way of software vendors being able to perpetually hold you to ransom for the software because you never actually outright buy it. It's like renting an Avis car. Once you've stopped renting it, you've got to give it back. That's it. You've got no ownership at all. Same with software. So the opportunity to switch off support and carry on using that vehicle or that piece of software has gone away. So it's another way of locking in customers. The next thing is that lots and lots of the licensing, which they all touted as being really flexed up, flexed down. Your business shrinks, take some costs out. Your business grows, put some extra users in. All that gets thrown away by the vast majority of these vendors' licenses. Once you've added another 100 users, you can't take them back again. If you're a company that sells trees at Christmas time or turkeys for Thanksgiving, and you want to be able to scale up and scale down, it doesn't work. The promise has gone away, but the negative piece, which is locked in, has stayed.
Yeah, and this is right on topic with our how to free up vendor and budget roadblocks. So, I mean, the statistics are there. We've got a market which is 4.7 trillion in enterprise software, enterprise IT software being spent by organizations globally. But I was really surprised, and I didn't know this until I did some research before a recent Gartner presentation, that 500 billion of that, so less than 10%, is actually been spent on this cloud, right? So really only 10% of the enterprise IT. So should organizations continue to increase that spend so that more of that enterprise IT budget is moving to the cloud? Are you suggesting we should stop because it's going to get worse? Like you're going to be further locked in?
Well, I don't know the answer. I'll be honest with you, because it's one of these things. It's not which is the best option, it's which is the least worst option. Because you've got your on-premises systems, the vendor sunsets the on-premise systems, doesn't do any support, nothing's moving forward, but you're still having to pay your support costs, changing perpetual licenses to make them not perpetual. If you take upgrades, you're changing the whole basis of the arrangement. Or if you're going into the cloud, you can't get back out. It's like Hotel California, isn't it? Isn't that once you check in, you're not checking back out again. And Hotel California. And so, do we have to go back to writing our own damn software and buying the physical hardware and putting it in our own data center and having our own staff to support it? Because the alternative is just too toxic.
And it also, I think, Brendan and Steve, I think it depends on what are you using the cloud for? Cloud in itself is not bad, right? It's not bad. But what are you using cloud for? Are you using cloud for your systems of record, like an ERP, or, there's no feature parity and there's a big lock-in, there's a big risk? Or are you smart and using cloud in all your engagement type systems, right? Are you using cloud, the faster, the cheaper, the more nimble type cloud technologies around the edges of your core system? So don't mess with your core systems. You've already perfected, have it great. But along the edges, you can have technologies that can increase customer satisfaction, customer service, all the social, the mobile, all the faster, cheaper, more nimble, as I call them. That, I think, is a great way to use the cloud, because you don't wait for this big platform type, SAP cloud or Oracle cloud and this cloud and that cloud, but you're going after a certain domain. And there are so many great cloud technologies out there. So if you're, if you can figure that balance, I'm not going to mess with these things in the back end. No point. It's not going to move the needle for my business, but I'm going to use cloud in the front end with all these technologies, right? Anyway.
Well, that's a reasonable approach. In fact, I would say that, enterprise consumers have got some legislative support from governments and things, anti-competitive behaviors, antitrust legislation, etc. But in the software business, I think it is about time that government started lifting up the covers. The European Union's been doing some really good work here and dealing with vendors that are being anti-competitive. But the genuine thing, as a CIO, I recommend that you make sure that your systems are as loosely coupled as possible. And what I mean by loosely coupled is it means that when you decide that you've fallen out with that vendor, or that they're not supporting it properly, or it's not being evolved appropriately to suit your business, that you can actually eject and bring in another one, and it doesn't destroy your entire architecture. So that's the real approach. There's another approach where you can say, let's go one vendor. And in the old days, you did that with IBM. You had all your IBM software on your IBM hardware with your IBM support, and it all worked together, which was great. But then you're locked in. And actually, you've got to work really hard to not get locked in.
Yeah, and you've got all the problems that we talked about at the beginning of the podcast about the rules being changed without you being told. Right. But Harry, to your point about that, let's call it front-end digitization, unlocking new paths for growth and enabling or overhauling customer engagement and giving customers a better experience, or driving revenue through delivering new products, etc. all that's great, right? And we know that this is what the CEOs want, but there's a problem. And what is the problem? The problem is they don't have the money, right?
How do you pay for it? How do you pay for it? And I think you touched upon it all, the presentation, the recent research we've been doing here, right? It's, 80%, depending on the study, right? I'm just picking on a Gartner study, thinking of a Gartner study, 80% of the CEOs and the board want you to go digital, digital, digital. Nobody's getting a break. Despite all these headwinds we are facing, inflation, yes.
But Harry, you mentioned, about being smart about how you use the cloud, right? And front-end digitization to, I guess, unlock new paths for growth, overhauling and delivering a better customer experience so customers keep coming back, maybe, reduce your customer churn. But there is a problem which is being discussed, and I saw it in, I think, also Gartner, a few Gartner plugs today, that there isn't enough money to deliver on the digital innovation roadmap that the CEO wants. Like, what is the problem?
Well, that is the problem, the big billion-dollar problem, right? How do you pay for it? And you alluded to it, Brendan, but 80%, according to this Gartner study, 80%, 80+% of CEOs board, everybody wants you to go digital, digital, digital first. And nobody's getting a break, despite all the headwinds, right? We talk about inflation, we talk about, all the economic uncertainties, all of that aside. I think, now the CEOs and board recognize here's a great time to put the lead and grow the company, put the lead over competition, grow the company, but you need new technologies. And guess who's left carrying the bag? The CIO. It's like, and here's another one. 96% of CEOs say that their number one focus is cost reduction. So I just don't understand, you want growth, you want digital, you want this, but I want you to cut cost. I want you to be smart. And Mr. or Miss CIO, that's why I always think, for the CIOs, these are the best of times and these are the worst of times. I mean, if you can figure this balance out, then you are, it's a terrific time to be a CIO if you get that. So I would love to have Steve comment and get us started on, Steve, you understand the dilemma, right? I mean, how do you free up that budget to focus more on these digital stuff?
Well, I think the key thing is to recognize that not all computer systems are created equal. There are really three categories. The first one, if you said to the CEO, I'm going to cut costs on this, he'd look at you like you had two heads. He'd say, don't do that. Do not cut costs on this. Spend more money on it. These are the core systems that drive the business, the platforms, the ERP systems, the manufacturing systems, the systems that you put more money in, you put more investment in, it drives customer retention, kills the competition, drives profitability, customer delight, all the things that businesses are designed to do. CEOs talk out of two sides of their mouth, but they're not talking about this stuff. They're absolutely not talking about this stuff. So I call this the invest category, because the CEO knows about it and he's quite happy to write checks. No problem at all. I can get you more business if I can spend more money on this. CEO says, how much money do you want? And he gives you it. Off you go. Because that becomes cost of sale. Then you've got the operate category, which is the kind of things you were talking about earlier, Harry. Things like the telephone system, your email platform, your document management system. You can spend 10 times more money on them. They make no difference. They don't move the needle. They've got to be reliable. Okay, they've got to be reliable, but they need to be inexpensive. And that's where you can save money, because you can do things like focus on proper asset management, not having too many systems, get competitive, have loosely coupled systems so you can replace something that becomes too expensive and replace it with something that's more modern. ISDN changing to SIP is a really good example of the telecommunications business. Fundamentally different cost model. So CIOs can focus on that. But then there's the third category. I call it the contain category. And it falls into the same place as Chernobyl. They put this big concrete lid over the top to stop radiation leaking. And that's the old legacy stuff. You've still got it. The business depends on it. It doesn't change very often. It's something that just sits there. It's reliable, maybe running on the mainframe, running on mid-range platforms. And this is what we've been talking about earlier on today. We've been talking about some of these kind of dodgy vendors. Dodgy vendors are the reasonable thing to say, trying to do us over by increasing the cost of these legacy systems. We don't want to touch them because actually they're valuable. We've spent the money on them. We've bought the perpetual licenses. They're not changing. There's no driver for getting rid of them except the vendors are trying to stiff us and take more money off us. Or they're just reaching the end of their support life and you can't buy the spare parts even on eBay. And that's where we are. So those are the three categories. You can't really fix the invest category, and the CEO doesn't want you to do that. The operate category, there's loads of things you can do there to maximize your savings. The legacy or contain category, you need to start thinking about third party maintenance, taking things off support if you don't need that support, gradually chipping away and ensuring that you're containing and reducing that cost.
Yeah, well, the only way to put money into the first category is to reduce cost in one of the other categories. I mean, software is the second highest spend category after people, right? So I don't really want to touch the people because I like the people I work with. I don't want to see them hit the streets. So I've got to go after software. But I don't know, is it a lack of, is it fear? Is it a lack of information? We talk about FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt. Or we talk about a lack of information? I mean, is it those two things that prevents people from saying, I'm just going to stop doing what I've been doing, which is fueling the mega vendors, and following their roadmaps? Like, why can't we just stand up, be brave, and say, I don't need, there's an alternative way? Is it fear, or is it just a lack of knowledge?
It's a combination of both, Brendan. There is a degree of fear because, the average CIO tenure isn't that long. It's a couple of years or 3 years or something like that. And lots of CIOs get fired. As an interim CIO, I quite often go in and place somebody who got fired, usually for doing something dumb. Now, if you're in that kind of environment where you get fired for doing something dumb, you tend to become really risk averse. And if you're risk averse, you don't stand up and say, well, I'm going to do something slightly different from all the other companies. I'm going to just come out of what the norm is, because maybe you're going to get fired, but actually you get paid the big bucks. You're supposed to take calculated risks, communicate clearly what it is that you're doing, and get buy-in and get it done.
Yeah.
A lot of it is ignorance that the IT team don't really understand what the alternatives are.
Yeah.
And the vendors try and hide it from them.
Well, what we need more organizations like Sainsbury, who was one of our clients. In fact, we won an award, a bit of a plug for ourselves here. I'm not sure if that's allowed on that kind of, at this podcast, but we won an award, but it was called the Save to Invest Award, right? And it was really, we got recognized by something that Sainsbury's did, which is they realized that they were getting gouged. They knew they needed to invest, so they saved money on unnecessary spend. So they did what you're saying. They stood up. They were to be counted. Somebody was getting paid the big bucks, and they made the right decision. So it can be done, and it can be done successfully. I mean, you wrote a book about some of this, Steve, yes, which is What Every CIO Wants, and I think the website is whateveryciowants.com. Is this covered in your writing?
It is a bit, yeah. I cover the three categories of technology and some thinking that CIOs really ought to have to understand how to operate effectively. And it's just many years of experience and loads of scars.
Yeah. Well, it's a giveaway at $10 because I was looking at your website and reading it. So we should definitely buy a few copies here at Origin and hand around to our sales team. And I think we definitely will that. But it sounds like there'll be invaluable information in that. So that's What Every CIO Wants by Steve O'Donnell. And you've got vast experience, Steve, with working now with the People's Pension, but also a CIO of actually one of our customers, Coventry Building Society. So
I was CIO at Coventry, and also at Gallagher, the insurance broker. So I've got many years under my belt of being a CIO, and you learn what goes right and what goes wrong quite quickly.
Yeah, well, there's been many words of wisdom on today's podcast, and so thanks for that. I think we'll be taking some of those nuggets and maybe create what we call it in the marketing space, atomizing them for reuse. But you're not the only author in this room, because we've also written an ebook which we've distributed on LinkedIn, and it's about driving digital innovation. So it's really kind of topical. I mean, this podcast is hitting on some of that. So there's a forward from our CEO, I should say. And it does talk about, the problem, the issue of budget, how to overcome it, what's really going on, what's motivating the CTO and their instructions down to their CIO. And so it kind of talks about the problem, but how to solve them. So that's available on our website and also on our LinkedIn page. But we're going to have to call it a day, because we're going to go over time, and we like to keep these podcasts to like, people want to get in their 10,000 steps, they can listen to us, but if we go on any longer, then they'll have to walk 12,000 steps. So I'd like to thank you both. I'd particularly like to thank yourself, Steve, for joining us today, giving us an hour of your time. Really appreciate that. And to Harry, thanks, Harry. Thanks for making my job easy today.
Thank you both.
Thank you both,
and Steve, appreciate your insights, and as Brendan said, valuable nuggets. I learned a lot.
Yeah, and hopefully our listeners did too. And if our listeners do have any suggestions as to how we could improve our podcast, or topics that they'd like us to talk about, or maybe if they'd like to have Steve back on, and that's a suggestion, well then just email us at info@origina.com. But we're going to leave there for now. So thanks again, gentlemen. Really appreciate it. That was really great discussion. I really enjoyed it. So sayonara, over and out. Auf Wiedersehen.
Okay.
A tutelaire, whatever.
All right. Thanks, guys. Cheers.
See you guys.
See you, folks.
Bye.
Bye.